Hey math fans, welcome to day 3 of section 4.1 in AP Statistics. Let's get started. So the title for day 3 is Inference for Sampling. The purpose of a sample is to give us information about a larger population. Again, I always want you to refer back to that picture where it had, you've got a large sample, which is your population, and then you have a subset of your population, which is your sample, and then you have your population, which is outside of that. What we're going to do is we're going to take the sample and we're going to try and make inferences. Okay, we're going to try and make conclusions to generalize, whatever the values that we get for our sample. We're going to be like, you know what, probably the population is pretty darn similar. So that raises the question, why should we rely on random sampling? Number one, this is the big one right here, is to avoid bias. But I would say you're not going to avoid it entirely. Bias is always going to be there, but I'm going to definitely say that you're going to lower it significantly. By doing random sampling, you're significantly lowering bias. And the simple random sample will get you the lowest possible bias, but there will always be bias. Bias was one of those things you can really never get rid of. The laws of probability allow for trustworthy inference about the population, and the results of random samples come with a margin of error. We're going to talk more about that, big time in second semester, okay? What happens is that the larger these samples become, the smaller the margin of error. We can really, really take pretty darn good guesses about our population the bigger the sample is that we take. So what can go wrong, right? We have our, you selected the right people. You used random sampling. You did a simple random sample. What else could go wrong? Well, there's a lot that could go wrong. And let's talk about it. First of all, what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have what is called undercoverage. And that's when some members of the population cannot be chosen in a sample. You think you have the entire population, but you don't. You didn't give everybody in the population a number because you could never get a hold of them. And I'm kind of talk more about that on the next slide. I have a couple examples, but undercoverage is one of those things that can definitely lead to bias because you're not including everybody. And then you can, after you've actually selected the people, there is a chance that they just will not respond. Maybe they don't like the questions you're asking. Maybe you can't even get a hold of them. Maybe you sent it in an email and they just hit delete. That's non-response right there. And because you had selected them to be in your survey, their voice is not being heard. They're not representing the population. Because now you have to go and find other people. And now it seems like only the people who are responding, they might have strong opinions. It's almost like voluntary response. So non-response is an issue. So all of this could point in the direction of what is called response bias. And response bias really is one of these things where you have to pay attention to how did you ask the question. Okay, so they are responding. You sampled the people well. Now you've got their survey back, or you gave them the survey, and all of a sudden you're asking questions that they don't want to be truthful with you about for whatever reason. Or some of the questions might be leading. And these leading questions can really influence your survey. Wording of the questions is pretty important. You don't want to word your questions such that they're leading, and you don't want to sway the reader's response in any way. You just want to really get straight to the point. You don't want to have police officers doing a survey asking people if they broke the law. Okay, that's going to really be, that's going to lead to response bias, because no one wants to tell a police officer, yeah, I break the law all the time. So what you can do to protect yourself from response bias is you can have your surveys be anonymous, and you will get more truthful answers. So what is undercoverage versus non-response? And I like these two pictures here. I have a phone book on the left here, and I have someone knocking on the door on the right, and I'll explain what each of these pictures mean. Back in the good old days, when everybody had landlines, they would put out this book called a phone book, and you could actually look up people's numbers based off their last name or businesses. And they still have phone books. It's just nobody uses them anymore because we have cell phones and we have the internet. But in the phone book, what they would do is they would use a phone book and consider that the population. And maybe they're giving, they gave everybody a number in the phone book, and they randomly generated a sample of however many. The problem is that the reason why that's bad and why it would lead to undercoverage is not everybody was in the phone book. Maybe you had an unlisted number. Maybe you just didn't have a phone number in general. So that's undercoverage. Those people are not part of your population. That phone book where you think you have the entire population, you don't. And so when you don't have the entire population, that leads to undercoverage. They weren't even able to be in your sample in the first place. Now, the second picture has to deal with non-response. Let's say you do have everybody in your population has a chance of being selected. That's great. That's wonderful. But let's say you go to their door to ask them the question or give them the survey, and you knock at the door. Maybe it's during a weekday. You knock at the door, and guess what? Nobody answers. No one's there to answer your survey question. Non-response. If they never answer your survey, that means it's going to lead to bias because their voice is not being heard. Same with sending an email. Congratulations, you've been selected to fill out this survey. Delete. Non-response. So knocking at the door, sending emails out, and people deleting the emails for surveys is an example of non-response. So undercoverage is where you can't even get selected in the first place. Non-response is you were selected, you just never responded. And I believe that will do it for this section. All right, we'll see you in class.